interesting subject at the innovation stage. And the next subject, I personally think this, even though I haven't seen the presentation, isn't that far away from it, because we're talking about RFID systems that needed in production nowadays, but we haven't reached the end of the line as to what can be done. We're talking explicitly about safety and security, and I'm very happy to welcome here Mark Wiederroder from Euchner, who's going to be telling us what this is all about. Mark, the floor is yours. All the best.
Vielen Dank. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I too would like to say welcome to the innovation stage. I'm pleased that you've all come here today to have a discussion with me about the interplay between safety and security in the selection of the operating mode with RFID systems, and to talk about this afterward. My name is Mark Wiederroder. I'm product manager at a company called Euchner. In particular, I am responsible for RFID-based access systems, and working together with our customers, I ensure that special applications with RFID-based access systems, such as the application of the selection of operating mode, is implemented directly with customers. Euchner is a family-owned and managed company, third generation. The managing director, Stefan Euchner. It was founded in 1953 by Emil Euchner, who you see at the bottom left. In the last 70 years, that company has become a global manufacturer of high-quality safety and security systems and solutions, and as a result, we have 42 subsidiaries and trading partners the world over. Here you see some of our products from our product portfolio. We have the high-quality safety and security solutions, such as safety and security switches, machines for access, and we also have RFID-based access systems right at the machine access area. And this is what we're going to be talking about right now. These are the three subjects we'll be talking about. First of all, this is something you probably asked yourself before coming here, or maybe when you heard the intro to the presentation. Why is this subject of operating mode selection relevant for you at all? Then we'll talk about the technology, the interplay between safety and security in your selection of operating mode and implementation of it, and everything you have to take into account in order to ensure that you do make the right selection of operating mode. And then the advantages of an RFID-based access system if you are going to implement what you have decided for your operating mode. Next question, why is the selection of operating mode relevant for you? There are certain subjects that you've probably seen in actual practice on your shop floor. You've seen and felt this yourself. For instance, commissioning, and then during use, and also for service and maintenance, and for reasons of comfort and convenience, or because the operators are used to it. Sometimes you have security and safety features that are overridden so that people can get into the machine and do things manually, even though they shouldn't be doing that. And sometimes what can happen is that the protective devices have to be overridden in order to make sure this machine continue to work in the future. And this is not just a risk for the machine, but also for the people doing this. And they're often not aware of what they're doing, of the risk and of the dangers. And even if they're aware of the dangers, they often ignore them. On the basis of this experience from actual practice, we have, well, first of all, the theory, the rules, regulations, and a lot is developed on the basis of this in the last few years and decades. First of all, you have the machinery regulation. In the future, it'll be a machinery directive. It tells you what has to be done in this area. In addition to that, you've got standards or other regulations. We've got the industrial safety regulation in Germany about how to deal with protective equipment, and the fact that this should not be overridden, and how it's supposed to protect users. There are other standards too, like 13849 and special standards for individual machines or types of machines, operating centers, milling centers, grinding machines, robot cells, and so on. And they focus in particular on the selection of operating mode and individual operating modes that can be used in these different machines. Now, you have all of these different subjects in the standards, in the regulations, and as a result of all this, we want to eliminate these problems in actual practice. In specific terms, access to these dangerous areas and activities should be limited, and tampering, which sometimes is even necessary, is still done anyway, even though it shouldn't be done, should be minimized. In addition to that, we want to reduce the number of accidents to zero if possible and eliminate them. So we have a very clear statement to make here. Manipulation, tampering is definitely not the solution for doing this type of thing on a machine, commissioning or service or maintenance. Very clearly you see this in the regulations and standards, and the solution for this is selecting the right operating mode. Now, when you select the operating mode in general, there are different things you have to take into account. You have some key points: safety, functional safety, and then security, cyber security, about accessing your operating system selection. Now, how safe and secure does your operating mode have to be? Well, you have to assess risks and so on. And in general, the operating mode selection can be broken down into three systems. First of all, access system, system for allowing access to certain operating modes, and then you have the selection system in order to actually select the operating mode, and then you have the activation system so that you can activate the operating mode and then implement that in the machine. Now, in terms of evaluating these three different areas, there are major differences. The selection system and activation systems, they're safety related. They have to be done with high level of functional safety, and they have to achieve a certain performance level, and they have to be included in the safety level for the machine. Then for the access system, that's not the case. It doesn't have to go into risk assessment for safety. However, it is true that just because of the new machinery regulation, the subject of security is becoming more important, and therefore it shouldn't be neglected either. Security is a key component when you look at assessing machine and selecting the operating mode. Now let's first of all look at this. How safe, functionally safe must the operating mode selection be? Well, for every operating mode you've got defined safety functions that are to protect the operator from risks and from dangers. Then you have automatic operation, top right. That is the closed access gate and activated safety measures such as safety switches, safety systems. All of these things that make the area around the machine safe. Then other operating modes, for instance, setup mode, where you have other safety functions such as reduced speed of the machinery or of the work done in the machine. And you have to have an agreement button or an operating unit to protect the operator while he's doing certain things. And what you see here is that the safety functions can change depending on the operating mode. If you switch from one operating mode to another, certain safety features are switched to. Since there is a switch over, there are potential risks, of course, if you have a mistake made here during the switch over, and you might mistakenly activate the wrong safety functions. And therefore, very clearly, like I was showing you on the previous chart, switching from one operating mode to the next does have to achieve a certain performance level. So it has to be done with a high level of functional safety. Now, how the safety assessment is done can depend on different standards, C standards, rules and regulations for a certain type of machine. So the special standards that apply there have to be taken into account, but in general, the operating mode selection is definitely safety relevant or safety related. Next subject. This is something that is a pretty complicated one to answer nowadays. How secure does the operating mode selection have to be? Well, here you have some excerpts from the machinery regulation that talks about two different levels. These are excerpts from a longer chapter, and I'd like to quote these. If a number of operating modes are defined with different operating functions, the machine has to be equipped with an operating mode switch that can be switched off in any position. So there are different safety functions, and if they are switched off, they have to be actively switched off. When you move from one operating mode to the next, you have to be able to switch things off. Certain safety features have to be available there. Then there's a second paragraph here which focuses in particular on security. The operating mode selection switch can be designed so that the use of specific functions can be limited to certain groups of operators. Now, what this means is there's no must, but it's a clear recommendation from the machinery regulation that the operating mode shouldn't be able to be switched by anyone at will. Rather, very clearly, authorization for actually doing this, switching from one operating mode to the next, should be limited. And there are different aspects that we're going to talk about when we look at the next chart. First of all, the first paragraph there, how safe does the operating mode selection have to be? Well, the operating mode has to be switchable, and when that's done, you have to have certain safety functions. For instance, a selection switch. Is that enough? Well, for certain, you see the different operating modes available. Anybody can switch that selection switch. You see clearly what operating mode is then active, but there are no restrictions as to who can actually change the position of the switch here on the machine. And the machinery regulation has proposed an improvement here. For instance, there would be restrictions. You'd have a mechanical key or a password that you could use so that at least you could have certain restrictions for activating the different operating modes. But there are ways of getting around this. Passwords can be passed on. You've maybe seen this actually happen on the shop floor. You have a password where they put up there with a sticky note, or people pass the password on from one person to the next. So that's not a very safe system. In addition to that, you might have a mechanical key switch, but people would just leave the key in there, and anyone could then change the operating mode, so that's not sufficiently safe either. And then administration here isn't very easy either. If somebody might lose a key, well, somebody else who can use that, who might find the key, could have another key made, or he can put it in his pocket and then use it. So administration and controlling the switching of operating mode is not sufficient here. So there are better possibilities, such as an RFID reader, because it overcomes these disadvantages and therefore offers advantages. In particular, RFID readers, well, these keys aren't anonymous, or rather, they're not customized, they can be anonymized. So each one, or rather, it's not anonymous, it's customized. Everyone can get their own key, and then it's easy to understand afterward who's had access to the machine, what operator has done it, so you have much more transparency in operation of the machine. An RFID system makes it possible to implement different applications too. So it's not just like with the key switch, just selecting the operating mode. Rather, additional data can be stored on the RFID data storage system, and you can implement other ideas therefore in the machine. The advantages of implementing operating mode selection with RFID readers is what we're going to talk about now. But before we talk about the advantages, let's have a quick look at what an RFID reader is and what the general function of an RFID reader is. Fundamentally, as you perhaps probably already know, what an RFID reader does is process data of any type. So this means storing data on a storage medium. That might be authorization, such as maximum operating mode, or personal identification, or parameters, or any other data you want to store there. And the data then is read by the reader and could be immediately analyzed. So the data on the key can be compared, and then the system will say, okay, is this key valid here or not? In combination with overarching systems such as a, say, control system or an overarching administration of users, data from the data carrier can then be passed on to these overarching systems in order to approve the use of other systems. And here you have the system that I was telling you about, that it's possible to follow up what's been happening. If someone is at the machine, you can see, for instance, who changed what parameters, or you can actually see who was working on the machine. So this offers you more transparency. In addition to that, for the user himself, it's possible to have user feedback via LED to say to the user, okay, you're allowed to work on the machine, or you're not allowed to work on the machine. You don't have authorization to do that. In addition to that, with different data carriers, different colors, different versions, it's possible to make a visual distinction to show the operators what authorization they have. Now, this technical information for the RFID reader offers us the possibility to list the concrete advantages. Basically, the advantage, if you have operating mode selection with RFID readers, the individual RFID keys can be customized, as I was saying. So this means the following. You have clear assignment of a key to a user and then that person's authorization. So the user, therefore, the operator is always clearly identifiable. There you have a key for an operator, Ben, or one for the supervisor, Mark. And with this customization or personalization, it's possible to actually always understand what's been done by whom on the machine. So you can have an access log or to make a record of access so you have more transparency, and you can identify who was working on the machine there or whether there was anybody ever working on the machine. Now, a big subject when you talk about operating mode selection for end users, it's about convenience in administration of the keys. For key administration, it's important to make it as convenient as possible, but it's also got to be safe. We were talking previously about the example with the selector switches or the passwords or the keys that can be passed on. But here you have authorization for a single user, and no one will have that specific authorization that that person has. Here you have the same example. Each operator has individual authorization for different types of operating modes. For instance, operator Ben, for instance, can at a maximum go up to automatic operating mode. Mark, the supervisor, he maybe has done more training, or maybe he's been working for the company for a longer time and knows more about the machine itself. That person can do setup even, for instance. So with that operating mode, he can do more with that machinery than the operator, Ben, can. In addition to that, for convenience and security of key administration, you can block a key. So if an operator loses a key and you don't want anybody else to be able to find it and use it on that machine, it's possible to immediately block or freeze a key. So that key will no longer allow access to the machine. And then in terms of administration, you can limit the time. Ben has to do, for instance, regular training courses. You can say, okay, the amount of time you're allowed to access it is this until you do a training course. Now, if a key has been blocked or if a user loses the key, that doesn't mean that that person can never work on the machine again. Rather, RFID systems offer a way to administer keys and pass out keys much less bureaucratically, thus making the whole system much more convenient. A key can quite simply be created by, let's say, a foreman or whatever, supervisor, and then given it to the operator. And maybe it'll have an end-of-use date too, so that further control is possible. The target for all end users, of course, should be to have have the smallest number of keys available for one operator. So the worst case is, well, if you have mechanical keys for every machine, you have to have a separate key, and at the end of the day, well, you have a keychain. That would be too big for your pocket. And with an RFID system, you can have different authorizations on one single key, and therefore you have one key that will allow you to go to and work on all machines in one area or in the entire machine park. So that means administration of the keys and the authorization is much easier, and for the user too, well, it's much easier, much more simple too, because it's easier to carry this authorization around in your pocket. And then for keys and authorization, security is of course always a subject. For RFID-based access systems and for the keys, it's possible to directly encrypt the data on the key. So this means that data security is implemented too right away. With RFID-based access systems, it's therefore possible for you to ensure that other outside operators or users or hackers or whatever, here you have an extreme example, hackers, they can't access much data and even change it. The operator, of course, can't change it either, and that's not something you want anyway often, because the authorization is supposed to be managed at a central location. At the same time, it's not going to be easy to copy data, so you can't have just any employee make a new key, so it's supposed to all be done centrally, and therefore you have more convenience and more security. So there's a very clear statement we can make on this. With RFID-based access systems, we and you, of course, will comply with the machinery regulation and the industrial safety regulation, but in addition to that, you make it possible for machine users to have a much more convenient system for key administration, and therefore you have much more additional value with your machine. Next, how do we do the operating mode selection? Well, there are two different possibilities, two different ways that this can be implemented if you're going to work with an RFID-based security system. Now, the idea here is to use existing operating elements so that you don't have to generate additional elements, additional hardware won't be needed. It's therefore supposed to be easy and convenient and flexible to set up. First of all, if you were using push buttons in the past, well, an RFID system is used just as an access system in order to distinguish between the different operating modes. And then the maximum operating mode or the operating mode that's supposed to be used is selected via the button, and then it controls the machine. And then there's another way of doing it with special RFID-based access systems. You can do it with a touch panel. There are advantages here compared to push buttons because you eliminate hardware. You have much less hardware on the machine, therefore, and at the same time you've got a flexible software solution so that the operating mode selection can be done right at the touch panel. Together with RFID-based access systems, you've got the possibility here of making available different applications and parameters at the touch panel, certain applications that the customer might want too. After my presentation, if you wish, we can talk about possible applications for you and for your customers. This chart here is just intended to give you a general idea of how the operating mode selection can be implemented, and the details, of course, have to always be discussed within the framework of your specific application. So, in summary, we can say this. There are three questions on the chart, and we can give you quick and brief answers to that. Why is the operating mode selection relevant for you? We have experience from actual practice from the shop floor, and then we have the theory that we heard about today. And on the basis of this, you can reduce the number of accidents, you can limit access to certain activities, and you can minimize possibilities for tampering and manipulating your machinery so that your machinery can be much safer and more secure, and your operating mode selection is safer and more secure. Now, how safe and secure does your operating mode selection have to be? Well, in terms of safety, the operating mode selection is safety related, and so switching and activation has to be safe, and at the same time access to a certain operating mode, in particular to operating modes that entail certain risk, they should be secure as well. And this shouldn't be looked at separately, it should be looked at together as a unit. We can therefore say that safety and security have to go hand in hand, and you've got to look at both, not just one or the other, and as a result you can implement the right operating mode selection. The advantages of an RFID-based access system for you are, first of all, you will adhere to legal rules and regulations such as the machinery regulation and the industrial safety regulation. In addition to that, you have simple integration for machine manufacturers and integrators, and also for updating of existing machinery, so that with your operating mode selection you have a much more convenient machine and you have additional value for your customers. And in addition to that, you can expand your application to have a convenient, flexible, and a machine that's easier to use. If you want any more information on operating mode selection, safety, security with your operating mode selection, you can write to me. That's the QR code. You get my email and you can send your questions to me. But you can come and see me after the presentation too. As an alternative, you can come and see our booth in Hall 6, booth J11, Euchner. My colleagues and I will be there, and you can have a look at our RFID access systems. You can see them live. We can give you more information about them. You can get some impressions there, and maybe you can think about implementing an application for your company. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Let's give you a big hand. I do have a question. Now, this is a very specific subject. How many of your customers are aware of these regulations and the solutions? Well, operating mode selection, that's not a brand new subject, but it's always developing and evolving, especially with the machinery regulation, and that, of course, has brought things forward. In addition to that, well, we've got machine manufacturers in Germany who are looking at this subject and focusing on it. There's a lot of exchange going on there and implementing these applications. So, in combination with the technological basis that's changing, it really is something that's important for mechanical engineering companies, and we're the contact for that. You're not a startup. No, we have to ask that. You're an established company. How many customers already use your solutions? Well, I don't even know the total number, but in Germany in particular, we are in contact with all machine manufacturing companies. All of them are our customers, and then we've got automotive companies too, with RFID-based access systems, food industry, pharmaceuticals. We work around the world, customers around the world, all continents. We have expertise on all continents, so we have colleagues there who can provide support if it's not in Germany, but somewhere overseas. Great. Okay. Thank you very, very much. All the best, and let's give them a big hand.